Hey, it's James, and for today's video I'm talking about my single and some stuff related to it. So yes, I just released a single recently, Reaching Out, and I really like it. I put a lot of time into it, so please listen to it before or after watching this video. And I just wanted to talk about it in the sense of like kind of what it covers, and I hate over-explaining stuff. I don't want to over-explain anything related to the song really, because I don't know, I feel like it speaks for itself and people can grab meaning from where they want to grab meaning. And I don't like when someone tries to tell you what something's about. It's not a good way to view art. And yeah, I think a big theme of the album I'm working on and is almost ready, and really this song in particular, is kind of the sort of a detachment that commonly gets associated as being unique among youth culture in Gen Z and Gen Alpha, that I find kind of ironic because there's like a very obvious group that I think experiences this even more than these younger generations, and that's Gen X. And that's something that's not really a secret. I mean, people usually categorize the culture of Gen X with the grunge movement because that existed when they were like young, and that's a very like appealing thing to them, you know, when they were young. And the thing that categorized grunge was it was like punk, except it was more nihilistic. There's this sort of like aspect of punk music which is more focused on, I would almost say, the absurdity. There is this sort of like motivation. There's this cautious optimism. It is very humanistic. Punk music is. I think that's kind of part of what's definitive about grunge. Is there is this sort of nihilism. There's a sort of giving up. There's nothing more we can do. I'm reading this book by Mark Fisher, Capitalist Realism. He talks about it in the book a little bit. I think it's really interesting. This sort of idea of like how Kurt Cobain was able to even rebel when he was aware that what he was doing was a reiteration of prior ideas and that nothing happened. So there is this sort of almost hypocrisy or a paradox within Nirvana's work, because through its popularity and through its general stylistic aspects of it, like the stylistic aspects of it, it's hard to define as anything unique, much less contributing something. But it very much did, and there's this sort of like confusion with it I think Kurt had, and I think it makes sense in certain actions that he had, this sort of confusion with like, why am I receiving this much approval and praise for something that is that should be viewed either as subversive or derivative? Like those are the two options. And he's like, why is it getting praised when it's kind of doing neither? But really it's kind of both. Yeah, I think that's something that I've thought about and kind of ruminated on in regards to the song I just released, because the song I just released, the verse does in some ways kind of tie to that group, because when I made the song I originally didn't have a plan for any vocals for it, because I'm in this sort of old rave style, kind of similar to Orbital, if you know them, and I really liked it, the sort of UK scene, and part of the reason why I liked it is part of the sort of disillusionment, because it came about when UK youth culture was starting to accept that like the UK wasn't going to be dominant anymore the way it was before for prior generations. So coming to terms with that, they found sort of escape through this dance music and the culture itself that emerged, that subculture. And I find that kind of inspiring because there is a sort of DIY nature to it, as well as more intent than maybe initially given to it. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of intention behind things. And yeah, I found that kind of relatable in a way. In doing that, I realized I was kind of playing into things that I feel comfortable criticizing others for, right? That sort of disillusionment, that sort of just being jaded and giving up. It is weird because like when I see it with older generations, I'm like, this is sad. They didn't take up any important positions, and this is so adverse for everything going forward, and it's creating all these issues. But at the same time, I almost naturally find it in the art I consume where I'm like attracted to it more than I am some of the more humanistic things, because I think a lot of the humanistic things are almost feel naive compared to the other stuff. I think that's a weird dichotomy, because it is important to recognize that at the end of the day, it is better to live as a humanist in some regards than as a nihilist. The transgressive ideals of kind of optimism in a sense that come with that outweigh in so many regards the matterless ideals that come through with like the nihilistic giving up jadedness. I think in culture right now, there is a sort of like love being given to just not trying. Loserism is an idea talked about a lot. And when I think of that, I think normally people associate that with millennials, and that makes sense because they were the first generation to, I think, in media promote loserism. But when you look at a lot of, again, tying it back to Gen X, it's like this is the demographic that's like listening to Joe Rogan the most. And the way people like talk about it, and you would think Joe Rogan is like a philosopher. The way people talk about him is they're either like praising him or they're treating him like he's like the king of intellectuals, where it's like they treat him as if it's like you just can't be intellectual without being on Joe Rogan. It's like, what are we talking about? Like, you're feeding into it. You're giving him all this power that I think even he recognizes he might not even have. And this sort of disdain for people that like consume that exists on one side of the aisle. And I think that disdain comes from a lack of perspective that it's like everyone's finding refuge in certain things, right? And when the pervasive idea throughout culture right now is that it's okay to give up on stuff and just to gawk at it and treat everything like it's, you know, this spectacle to look at and not engage with yourself. Listening to other people talk about it for 4 hours, or if you're Joe, bringing in a professional to talk about it for 4 hours, is riveting and something you would praise. And the sort of, I would say, like the leftist idea with that is the critiques, which is something that is associated with Marx because he kind of started, but doing a socio-cultural analysis before you even engage with the work directly. A lot of people don't read theory anymore, but they'll quote books that they haven't read in their arguments or in their Substack articles. And to me, that's just something that's indicative of this broader problem where it's like you're feeding into the disengagement, right? And I am talking about this sort of in a political spectrum way a little bit. I want to emphasize it's true within every niche in that. Like, the most prominent you see is within a lot of more, like, centrist groups. There's this sort of, like, well, everything's bad, so I'm just going to pretend like it's not happening, or I'm just going to disengage completely. And it's, like, a non-ideal ideal, you know? Like, there's no real value behind that. It's just kind of like, things are hard, so I guess just compromise. There's not a lot of thought behind it. And I'm not saying this is true for everyone. I'm saying this is true in a very broad sense. Part of the thing with thinking about this is I found myself more often than not sympathizing with these groups because I'm like, to get to that point, to give up is not a fun process, right? It's not a fun process. To become jaded is not a fun process. I think it is important to avoid that while at the same time feeling at the very least sympathetic, ideally empathetic to these groups, because it's like, no one really wants to live like that. No one really wants to live like the truest spectator and just watch everything go by. That I don't think is what these people are intentionally doing when they listen to these podcasts. I don't think that's what's happening in their minds, that by listening to this author talk instead of reading their book, they're not really engaging with it. Or even with other things, like with art. You don't have to make art to criticize it. But that being said, if you're analyzing it from the perspective of the person who made it, and it's more about the person who made it than the art itself, you're not contributing anything, even from a critical standpoint. You're just giving your own opinion on some stuff that doesn't matter. And the irony of it is coming usually from like a relativist perspective. So it's like, why does it even matter then? Isn't your idea that like it doesn't matter, you know? So I don't know. I think that's kind of the broader point of the song I made, is it's important to think. It's important to think and recognize that people, generally speaking, act with a certain amount of intention. And when people give up, it doesn't happen for no reason. There's usually a sort of disappointment involved. It can't be ignored that when this is rising, that's indicative of larger problems, and it's not unique to any generation. This is something that exists within everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this didn't come across too obnoxious. I'm talking about this. But let me know what you think in the comments. Please, please, please listen. Reaching Out by James Coe, all streaming services. Thanks for watching.